Welcome back. Today we're solving a haunting in Venice. Let's uncover the mystery, one clue at a time, with a cozy cup of tea in hand. The train to Venice slowed to a halt, its wheels screeching against the tracks as Hercule Poirot stepped onto the platform. The city, with its ancient canals and crumbling palazzos, seemed to pulse with an eerie, unspoken tension. A letter had summoned him here, urgent and cryptic. "Come, Monsieur Poirot, something terrible is about to happen." Poirot inhaled the damp air, his sharp eyes scanning the horizon. Venice had secrets, and it was clear someone was desperate to keep them hidden. As he walked toward the gondola, a chill ran down his spine. This case would be no ordinary investigation. Chapter 1. Arrival in Venice. Hercule Poirot stood on the platform at Venice's train station, his sharp eyes scanning the bustling crowd. The city seemed to breathe in a rhythm of its own, ancient and mysterious, its waterways winding like dark veins beneath a veil of fog. The air was damp, tinged with the smell of salt water and the faint echo of footsteps that had long been forgotten. Ah, Venice, Poirot thought, adjusting the brim of his hat. A city of secrets. But no secret can remain hidden from me. The invitation had come unexpectedly. A letter elegantly written, but unsettling in its content. "You must come to Venice, Monsieur Poirot. There are strange happenings here that only your intellect can unravel. We are in need of your particular skills." It was signed by an old acquaintance, one he had not heard from in many years. Countess Isabella Rossi, a woman whose beauty had once captivated the highest echelons of society. Poirot had his doubts about the letter's authenticity. The Rossi family had always been known for their wealth, their opulence, and their long-standing reputation as Venetian aristocrats, but also for their ties to some of the city's more dubious elements. The mention of strange happenings and the urgency of her tone were enough to intrigue him, even if he suspected that it was more likely a case of mischief or superstition than anything truly sinister. He stepped into a gondola, the rhythmic sound of the oars slicing through the water beneath him. The gondolier, a weathered man with an air of indifference, guided the boat through the narrow canals. The buildings along the sides seemed to loom, their windows watching him as he passed, and the flickering shadows reflected on the water only added to the sense of isolation he felt. The city had a certain weight to it, an atmosphere that was both beautiful and haunting. Its age, its history, seemed to seep into the very stones of the buildings, and its silence, broken only by the occasional murmur of voices from nearby alleyways, made Poirot feel like an intruder. What is it about Venice that makes the ordinary so extraordinary? Poirot mused. The question lingered in his mind, but he dismissed it with a small shake of his head. It was not the time for such flights of fancy. He had a job to do. As the gondola glided through a particularly quiet stretch of water, a sound caught his attention. Soft at first, almost imperceptible, but growing louder as they approached a large, dilapidated palazzo looming on the left. It was a building that seemed to have been abandoned for years, its once grand windows now boarded up, and its once proud facade crumbling with age. Yet, despite its dilapidation, there was something oddly alive about it. The building seemed to pulse with a faint energy, as though something or someone was watching him from behind the broken windows. The gondolier, sensing his curiosity, slowed the boat. "That is the Palazzo Rossi," he said in a low voice, his words heavy with a strange mixture of reverence and fear. "Many say it is cursed. There have been incidents." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Incidents?" The gondolier nodded but said no more, as though the words themselves were dangerous. Poirot had always been skeptical of superstition, but there was something about the gondolier's tone that made him pause. "Perhaps you would like to visit it, Monsieur Poirot?" The gondolier continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I would advise against it. The people here, they do not speak of it. They only avoid it. They say the spirits of the past still linger there." Poirot's curiosity deepened, though he was careful not to show it so openly. He knew better than to rely on rumors, but this mysterious palazzo, this family, had drawn him in. There was a puzzle here, and Poirot's mind was already racing with possibilities. He smiled politely at the gondolier and nodded. "Thank you for the information. But I must speak with the Countess Rossi first. Perhaps you will tell me more of the story." The gondola continued its journey toward the palazzo where Poirot would meet Countess Isabella Rossi. The entrance to the Grand Palazzo was as imposing as the building itself. A heavy wooden door, intricately carved, stood before him like a silent sentinel guarding the secrets within. He raised his hand and knocked, his sharp mind already calculating the possibilities that lay behind this door. The door creaked open, revealing an older man dressed in dark attire, his face lined with age and worry. He regarded Poirot for a moment before speaking in a low, gravelly voice. "Monsieur Poirot, I presume? The Countess is expecting you." He stepped inside, the door closing behind him with an almost finality that echoed in the cold marble halls. Inside, the palazzo was dark, the only light coming from the flickering of candles placed at odd intervals. The shadows seemed to move in the corners as though they were alive. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood and something faintly metallic. Poirot took a deep breath. The case had only just begun, but he already felt the tension in the air, the unease that lay beneath the surface of this seemingly quiet family gathering. And then he heard it, a soft, distant sound, like the whisper of voices coming from somewhere deep within the palazzo. Strange, Poirot thought. Very strange indeed. But his investigation would have to wait for the moment. The Countess was waiting, and whatever awaited him in the next few hours would change the course of his investigation forever. Chapter 2. The Haunted Palazzos. The evening sun had already dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the streets of Venice. The faint rustling of leaves and the distant murmurs of conversation echoed in the narrow canals as Hercule Poirot made his way through the palazzo's marble halls. The cold air inside the palazzo felt thick, almost as though it carried the weight of centuries of secrets. As Poirot's footsteps echoed against the stone floors, they were swallowed up by the oppressive silence of the ancient house. Countess Isabella Rossi, a woman of great elegance despite her age, had not changed much since he last saw her. Her beauty, though tempered by time, still held a magnetic pull. She was waiting for him in the palazzo's drawing room, a spacious chamber with high vaulted ceilings. The room was dimly lit by the soft glow of candles, their flickering flames casting an ethereal light across the walls, adorned with tapestries and portraits. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot," the Countess greeted him, her voice rich with both warmth and sorrow. "I am so glad you came. It is not often that I have the pleasure of seeing old friends." Poirot smiled, though his mind was already focused on the task ahead. "The pleasure is mine, Countess. I received your letter, and I must admit, Venice is indeed a city full of peculiarities." The Countess's eyes, dark and troubled, flickered with a hint of something more. "Yes, peculiarities, or perhaps curses. I do not know. I only know that something dark lurks in this house. The Rossi family has lived here for generations, but lately, things have changed. There are whispers, Monsieur Poirot, whispers of a presence that is not of this world. Poirot raised an eyebrow. He had heard rumors of hauntings in Venice before, whispers of restless spirits, ghostly figures, and curses passed down through the generations. But Poirot did not believe in the supernatural. He was a man of logic, of reason, and of order. The mind, he said slowly, can be a powerful thing. Sometimes it can play tricks on us. The Countess clasped her hands in front of her, her fingers trembling slightly. Perhaps, Monsieur Poirot. But tell me, why would so many people, guests, servants, even my own family, claim to have seen the same figure? A shadowy figure that appears at midnight, walking through the halls, disappearing before anyone can reach it? There are rumors of footsteps, of voices, of whispers in the dark. And there is more. Someone has died, Monsieur Poirot. A member of the household, but I cannot say what happened. It was as though the very walls of this house swallowed him whole. Poirot's sharp gaze never left the Countess. He studied her, the way her lips trembled, the slight furrow in her brow. She was hiding something, that much was certain. Whether it was fear or guilt or something else entirely, he could not say just yet. Tell me more, Poirot said, his voice calm and measured. Tell me everything you know about this death. Who died and when? The Countess hesitated, her fingers tightening around the lace of her dress. It was my cousin, Stefano. He was a young man full of life. He arrived here a week ago, and within days, strange things began to happen. At first, it was small things. A door left open when it should have been closed, objects moved from one place to another. But then, it escalated. Stefano began to hear voices. He claimed they spoke to him in the night, warning him of danger. I thought he was simply imagining things, but then she paused, her eyes glistening, with a hint of unshed tears. He was found in the East Wing, near the old library. He had fallen from the balcony. The doctor said it was an accident, that he was delirious, but Poirot interrupted gently, his mind already racing. But you do not believe it was an accident, do you, Countess? The Countess's face paled, and she looked away, her eyes fixing on a distant portrait on the wall. No, I do not. It is as if something is trying to take him, or to take us all. I fear the family's curse is finally catching up with us. Poirot said nothing for a moment, letting her words sink in. A curse, a ghostly figure, a death that did not add up. Away. There were too many pieces, and not all of them fit together just yet. He had always believed that in every mystery, the truth was often far more mundane than the imagination could conjure. Yet, this was Venice, a city where legend and reality blurred, and even the most logical mind could feel the weight of the unknown pressing against it. Countess, Poirot said, his voice cutting through the silence. You mentioned something about a ghostly figure. Who else has seen it? Many, she whispered, almost afraid to speak the words aloud. Servants, guests, no one is safe from it. But it is not just the figure. There are strange sounds in the night, whispers, footsteps in the halls, but no one is there. The servants are frightened, Monsieur Poirot. I am frightened. We are all frightened. Poirot took a step closer, his expression softening. Fear is a powerful thing, Countess. It can cloud the mind, turn a simple noise into a threat. But I assure you, there is always an explanation. It may not be the one you expect, but there is always a reason. The Countess nodded, her face still drawn with worry. I hope you are right, Monsieur Poirot. But I fear that whatever is happening here is not something that can be explained away. It is as though the house itself is alive, as though it is rejecting us. Perhaps it is our past, catching up with us. Poirot gave her a small, reassuring smile. We shall see, Countess. We shall see. But as he stood there, staring at the flickering candlelight and listening to the silence that stretched around him, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, something far deeper than mere superstition. The Rossi family had lived in this palazzo for centuries, and surely, if there was a curse, it was not something born of the supernatural, but something much older, hidden beneath layers of family secrets, unspoken guilt, and long-buried lies. As the Countess led him through the dark hallways, Poirot couldn't help but wonder, what was the true nature of the haunting in this house? And more importantly, what was the Countess hiding? Chapter 3. An invitation to a gathering. The evening air was sharp with the scent of salt water as Poirot stood on the grand staircase of the Rossi Palazzo, looking down upon the bustling servants who moved with hurried steps, preparing for the evening's gathering. The Countess had insisted that he attend the dinner that evening, despite his reservations. It was to be a formal affair, an intimate dinner for the most trusted members of the family and a few close acquaintances. But Poirot was not here for idle chatter or the company of high society. He was here for answers. As he descended the stairs, his polished shoes clicking softly on the marble steps, Poirot couldn't help but notice the grand but decaying nature of the palazzo. The walls, once richly adorned with tapestries and ornate furniture, now seemed hollow, echoing the absence of joy. The candlelight flickered nervously in the corners, casting long, twisted shadows that danced with the rhythm of an invisible, ethereal wind. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot," came a voice from behind him. Poirot turned to see Countess Isabella Rossi standing in the doorway to the drawing room, her face a portrait of strained politeness. She was dressed in a black gown, embroidered with gold thread that shimmered faintly in the candlelight. Despite her composed appearance, there was a weariness in her eyes that betrayed the tension she'd been carrying since his arrival. "Countess," Poirot greeted with a bow, offering a reassuring smile, though his mind was focused on the task at hand. "I trust the preparations are going smoothly?" Isabella nodded. "Yes, but I fear the atmosphere has become even more tense than before. The guests, they are not entirely comfortable with the situation here. Some speak of leaving. Some say they can feel it. The presence that haunts these halls. It's..." Her voice faltered slightly, and she glanced around, as if to ensure no one overheard. "It's become unbearable, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot studied her for a moment. The Countess was hiding something far deeper than she was letting on, but his professional demeanor kept him from pressing her just yet. He needed to observe more, learn more before making any direct inquiries. "Then it seems my presence is more necessary than ever, Countess," Poirot said smoothly, offering his arm. "Shall we join the others?" She hesitated for a moment, her eyes flicking to the dimly lit hall behind him. But then she nodded and took his arm. The two walked in silence through the labyrinthine corridors, the soft echo of their footsteps, the only sound breaking the tension. The dining room was large and elegant, its long table set with fine china and crystal glasses, all gleaming in the flickering candlelight. The guests were already seated, and their murmurs fell silent as Poirot entered, their eyes immediately fixating on him. The room was filled with the scent of roasted meats, fresh herbs, and a faint, cloying fragrance of roses, which seemed oddly out of place in the cold, foreboding atmosphere. Poirot took in the scene carefully, noting the faces of each guest. There was Marco Rossi, the Countess's brother, a man whose face was marred by the years of indulgence in too many pleasures and too little responsibility. His hand shook slightly as he sipped his wine, and his eyes darted nervously from one guest to the next. Next was Elena, Marco's wife, her face a mask of polite indifference. She sat with her back straight, her posture rigid, as though she were guarding herself from some unseen threat. Her fingers, however, betrayed her calm exterior, tapping nervously on the edge of her wineglass. There was also Giorgio, the family's longtime attorney, a gaunt man with sharp features and an even sharper gaze. He was watching Poirot intently, as if he were already measuring the detective's every word and gesture. And then there was the stranger, a woman who seemed oddly out of place in this old Venetian mansion. Tall and slender, with jet black hair and an air of mystery about her, she was introduced as Adriana de Llorente, a distant relative of the Rossi family. She sat with her back slightly hunched, her eyes never fully meeting anyone else's, though her lips twisted slightly as she observed the others. Poirot could tell immediately that the guests were nervous. There was a palpable unease in the air, an undercurrent of tension that made the already oppressive atmosphere seem heavier. The dinner was not the jovial affair it was meant to be, but rather a forced gathering, with each guest trying to ignore the shadows that seemed to crowd the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," Countess Isabella said, raising her glass, "it is an honor to have you here with us this evening. Despite the recent disturbances, I hope you can all enjoy the evening." The guests murmured their agreement, but Poirot could see that the Countess's attempt at keeping the mood light was only adding to the discomfort. She was trying too hard to maintain an air of civility, as though she feared the dinner would collapse into chaos if she didn't. Poirot remained quiet for the moment, observing the behavior of the guests. It was clear that all of them were hiding something, fear, guilt, or perhaps both. His suspicions grew stronger with each passing second, so something was not right here, something beyond the apparent haunting of the house. As the dinner progressed, Poirot's thoughts kept drifting back to the Countess's words. The presence that haunts these halls, he had sensed it himself. The subtle shift in the air, the way the shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally in the corners of the room. There was something more than just superstition here. He watched the guests carefully, noting their nervous tics, their forced smiles, their fleeting glances. It was as if they were waiting for something to happen, something they feared but didn't want to acknowledge. They spoke in clipped tones, keeping their conversations to a minimum, as though the act of speaking too much might invite the very presence they feared. But Poirot knew better than to rely on the overt behavior alone. His mind was already calculating, making note of every detail, every inconsistency. He had a feeling that this gathering was more than just a dinner, it was a stage. And the guests were actors, each playing a part in a performance they could not control. The night passed slowly, and though Poirot was careful to maintain his composure, his mind was racing. He could feel the weight of the mystery pressing on him, the pieces of the puzzle just within reach, but not yet fitting together. The Countess's fears were real, but so too were the secrets that each of these people carried with them. As the dinner wound down, Poirot stood and addressed the guests. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice cutting through the tension in the room, "I assure you we are not here merely to eat and make polite conversation. Something is amiss, and I intend to uncover it. You may not realize it, but every one of you is connected to what is happening in this house. And rest assured, I will get to the bottom of it." The room fell silent as Poirot's words hung in the air, heavy and final. No one spoke for a moment, and then, as though on cue, the silence was broken by a soft, almost imperceptible sound, a distant knocking, faint but distinct. Poirot's gaze snapped to the window, where the wind had begun to howl more fiercely outside. The sound of the knocking came again, closer this time, louder. What is that?" Elena's voice trembled, her eyes wide with fear. Poirot's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "Ah," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "It seems we are not alone after all." Chapter 4. The first incident. The evening had drawn on, and the warmth of the dinner table had slowly dissipated, leaving behind a coldness in the air that seemed to settle deeper into the palazzo's bones. Poirot's sharp eyes had observed everything, every detail, every glance, every word. But it wasn't enough yet. He could feel that something was being held back from him, a crucial piece of the puzzle that was just beyond his grasp. He had no choice but to wait for the right moment to allow the events to unfold on their own. As the dinner ended, the guests began to drift away from the table, some heading toward the drawing room, others slipping into the adjacent library, where the flickering light of a solitary candle beckoned. Poirot's mind, however, remained focused on the strange atmosphere that had pervaded the evening. The tension, the fear, it was palpable, like an invisible weight pressing down on them all. But then, just as the last of the guests were disappearing into the shadows of the old house, a strange sound shattered the stillness, one that could not be ignored. A loud bang echoed through the corridor, followed by a muffled thud, as though something or someone had fallen. Poirot's eyes narrowed. He rose smoothly from his seat, his every movement calculated and composed. "Countess?" he said, his voice steady, but with an edge of urgency. "Excuse me for a moment." The Countess, who had been speaking quietly to her brother Marco, looked up at him, her face already ashen. "What was that sound?" she asked, her voice trembling. "It came from the east wing, where Stefano died." Poirot nodded gravely. "I will investigate immediately." He made his way swiftly down the hallway, his steps echoing in the vast emptiness of the palazzo. His mind raced as he ran over all the information he had gathered so far. The unease of the guests, the Countess's fears, and the strange whispers that seemed to follow them wherever they went. But none of it fully explained the sound he had just heard. The east wing of the palazzo was far removed from the central dining area, its long corridors dark and eerily quiet. Poirot's footsteps slowed as he neared the place where Stefano had met his untimely end. The air here was colder, heavier, as though the very walls held onto the memories of tragedy. He stepped cautiously into the hallway, his eyes scanning every corner. The floor creaked under his feet as he advanced, the noise carrying unnervingly through the silence. The sound of his own breathing seemed unnaturally loud in the stillness, and Poirot felt his senses sharpen, his every instinct on high alert. He reached the door to the library, where the sound had originated. The door was ajar, just slightly, and a pale light flickered from within. Poirot pushed the door open carefully, his eyes immediately catching sight of something that made his blood run cold. There, in the middle of the room, stood Marco. Rossi, his face twisted in a mask of terror. His body was rigid, his hand frozen in midair as though he had been reaching for something or someone. His other hand clutched the edge of a bookshelf, his knuckles white from the force of his grip. And then, The source of the strange noise became clear. A large, ornate mirror that had once hung on the opposite wall had fallen, crashing to the ground with a thunderous noise. Shards of glass glittered on the floor, catching the dim candlelight, and the reflection of the room was distorted and broken. But it wasn't the shattered mirror that caught Poirot's attention. It was the figure standing in front of it. A figure dressed in a long, flowing gown, its edges frayed and tattered, its face obscured by a hood. The figure was eerily still, standing perfectly motionless in the center of the broken glass, as though waiting for something. Marco's voice trembled as he spoke. The ghost, it's here again. I saw it standing in the mirror. It was looking at me. Poirot's sharp eyes moved over Marco's form, noting the fear in his eyes, the trembling of his hands. The man was clearly shaken. But Poirot had learned long ago that fear could cloud the mind, distort reality. He approached Marco slowly, his gaze never leaving the figure in the center of the room. "What exactly did you see, Marco?" Poirot asked calmly, his voice cutting through the thick tension in the air. It was just standing there in the mirror. It looked like Stefano, but not Stefano. His eyes were dark, like they were empty, and it smiled at me. It smiled, Poirot." Poirot's brow furrowed, his mind working quickly, fitting the pieces of the strange puzzle together. "And when you saw it, Marco, what did you do?" I froze. I couldn't move. And then the mirror, it just shattered. I couldn't stop it. Poirot turned his gaze back to the figure in the center of the room. There was no one there now. The air was thick with silence, and the room, once filled with terror, now felt strangely empty. "Are you certain it was Stefano's ghost, Marco?" Poirot asked, his voice unwavering. "Could it not have been your imagination playing tricks on you?" Marco shook his head vehemently. "No. It was real, Poirot. I know what I saw. It was him, or something. Something that was pretending to be him." Poirot stood still for a moment, studying the shattered mirror on the floor. His mind was racing. As Maui Reacher, he had seen too much in his time to believe in ghosts, but there was no denying that something had disturbed Marco deeply, and the strange series of events, the whispers, the footsteps, the shadows, had all been building to this moment. Something was happening in this house, something that went beyond simple superstition. But what? Poirot took a deep breath and turned back to Marco. "The figure you saw, this spirit, was it standing in the mirror or behind it?" "It was in the mirror, Poirot," Marco said, his voice still shaking. "Right in front of me." Poirot's lips tightened as he processed the information. A reflection, a ghostly figure in the glass, a broken mirror. It was all too strange, too coincidental. "What you saw," Poirot said softly, "was not a ghost, Marco. It was something or someone trying to manipulate your mind. A trick, a carefully constructed illusion." Marco looked at him, confused. "You mean it wasn't Stefano?" "No," Poirot replied, his gaze cold and calculating. "But it was someone trying to make you believe it was. And that, my friend, is exactly what we need to understand." Poirot's mind was already turning, the wheels of his investigation beginning to spin faster. The pieces were finally falling into place, only they didn't fit quite right yet. There was something more, something deeper beneath the surface of this haunting. Someone was orchestrating this, someone with a plan, and Poirot would uncover that plan, no matter how long it took. Chapter 5. The Family. Secrets. The night had settled like a heavy blanket over the palazzo, its silence pierced only by the distant echo of footsteps and the occasional gust of wind rattling the windows. The incident in the East Wing had shaken everyone, and the atmosphere in the house was now one of palpable unease. Guests who had once been eager to indulge in polite conversation were now wary, exchanging nervous glances and whispers behind closed doors. Poirot had retreated to his quarters, his mind racing with the implications of what he had just witnessed. The shattered mirror, the ghostly figure, the way Marco had reacted, none of it made sense. And yet, the mystery seemed to deepen with every passing moment. Someone was behind these events, someone who was manipulating not only the guests, but the very atmosphere of the palazzo itself. His sharp mind already working, Poirot knew that the next step in solving this puzzle was to understand the Rossi family, especially its past. Family secrets were often the key to uncovering hidden motives, and if there was one thing Poirot was certain of, it was that the Rossi family was hiding something. Whether it was guilt, revenge, or fear, Poirot could not yet say. But he would find out. The following morning, after a restless night, Poirot made his way to the drawing room, where Countess Isabella had invited him for a private conversation. The morning light filtered softly through the curtains, casting long shadows across the grand room. Despite its beauty, the room felt colder than usual, as if the very walls were holding onto the dark secrets of the past. Isabella was already seated by the fireplace, her hands folded in her lap. She appeared more fragile than before, the weight of the previous night's events clearly taking its toll on her. Her eyes were bloodshot and her face was drawn, but she managed a faint, tired smile as Poirot entered. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot," she said quietly, her voice heavy with exhaustion. "I'm glad you came. I fear that I have been avoiding you, but there is so much I must confess." Poirot took a seat across from her, his eyes studying her closely. The Countess was a woman who had been born into wealth and privilege, yet there was something raw and vulnerable about her now. Something that suggested her carefully constructed world was beginning to unravel. "Countess," Poirot began, his voice calm yet firm, "I must understand more about your family's history. You mentioned a curse. But what exactly is this curse? What is it that has haunted your family for generations?" Isabella sighed deeply as though the weight of her own words was too much to bear. "I suppose it is time I told you everything. You must understand, Monsieur Poirot, that the Rossi family is not as noble as people believe. We are not the virtuous, untouchable aristocrats that others think us to be. There are secrets here, dark ones that we've kept hidden for far too long." Poirot remained silent, watching her intently. The Countess was finally opening up, and every word she spoke was another piece of the puzzle. "It started many years ago," she continued, her voice shaking slightly. "My great-grandfather, Giulio Rossi, was a man of great ambition, but he was also ruthless. He sought to expand the family's wealth and influence by any means necessary. There were shady dealings, rumors of bribery, deceit, and even murder. He would stop at nothing to protect his empire." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "And these actions, did they leave a mark on your family?" "More than you can imagine," Isabella replied, her voice a whisper now. "My great-grandfather's actions led to a terrible tragedy. He had a rival, a man named Antonio Bianchi, who was also a powerful figure in Venice. The two men were locked in a bitter feud, each trying to outmaneuver the other. Eventually, Giulio had Antonio killed, though it was made to look was an accident." Poirot's mind clicked into place. Murder disguised as an accident. A clever but dangerous scheme. Isabella nodded, her eyes filled with sorrow. Yes, but that was not the end of it. Antonio had a daughter, Elena Bianchi. She was young, only a child. But when her father died, she swore revenge on the Rossi family. She was sent away to live with distant relatives, but we all knew that she would one day return. And when she did, she brought with her something else. Poirot studied Isabella closely. Something else? A curse, she said, her voice trembling. Elena had become obsessed with the idea of revenge. She believed that the Rossi family would never know peace until they paid for what my great-grandfather had done. She practiced dark rituals. She had learned to summon spirits, to commune with the dead. It was said that she had the power to bring forth vengeful ghosts, spirits who would torment those responsible for her father's death. Poirot's expression remained unchanged, though inside his mind was working furiously. A curse, spirits, this was becoming more complicated by the minute. But Poirot had dealt with the supernatural in many forms, and he knew that even the most bizarre of claims often had a very human explanation behind them. "So, you believe the curse was real?" Poirot asked carefully. Isabella looked away, her eyes distant as if she were lost in the past. "I don't know, Monsieur Poirot. I was only a child when it happened, but I remember the stories. My father, Marco's father, they always warned us. They said we were never to speak of Elena again, that she would one day return to exact a revenge. And now, Stefano, he was the one who found the old letters, the journals, the records of Elena's actions. He became obsessed with them. And after he died, well, it was as though the past had come back to life." Poirot felt a chill run down his spine, but he pushed it aside. "What happened to Elena Bianchi? Did she return?" Isabella shook her head slowly. "She did. But by the time she returned, we had already been affected by the curse. The family was falling apart. Elena arrived at the palazzo one night, but when we confronted her, she claimed she had forgiven us. She said that she no longer wished to see the Rossi family suffer, but I never trusted her. And after she left, things began to go wrong. My father died unexpectedly. And then Marco's wife, Elena's cousin, passed away. It was as though death had followed us. Poirot was silent for a moment, allowing the weight of her words to sink in. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but they were still fragmented. A curse, a rival family, revenge. These were the elements of a deeply entrenched mystery, and Poirot knew that unraveling it would require more than just his usual methods. "Countess, tell me," Poirot said finally, "do you believe Elena's spirit still haunts this house?" Isabella hesitated, her eyes flicking nervously toward the door, as though she feared someone might overhear. "I don't know, Monsieur Poirot. But I fear something has been awakened. It's not just the past that haunts us. It's something else, something that has been set in motion, and now we cannot stop it." Poirot stood up, his mind clearer than ever. "Then we must act quickly, Countess. If there is a curse, we will face it. But I believe that the true answer lies not in the supernatural, but in the human motives that have been buried for so long. We must uncover the secrets that this family has tried so desperately to hide." The Countess nodded, her face pale but determined. "Please, Monsieur Poirot, do whatever you must, but hurry." Before it's too late, Poirot looked out the window, where the first light of dawn was beginning to break through the gloom. There was no time to waste. The mystery had deepened and the clock was ticking. Chapter 6. The Strange Death. The morning light crept lazily through the curtains, casting long, delicate shadows over the furniture in Poirot's temporary quarters. He sat at the edge of his bed, methodically adjusting his tie, his mind far away from the simplicity of the task at hand. The mystery surrounding the Rossi family had become more entangled with each passing hour. The death of Stefano Rossi, the young man whose fall had been written off as an accident, had been no mere misfortune. It was the key to unlocking something far darker. He had spent the better part of the morning contemplating the events of the past few days. The Countess had shared her family's secrets, but there were still gaps, things left unsaid. The history of betrayal and vengeance had only deepened his resolve to uncover the truth. Yet there was something more, something about Stefano's death that didn't sit right with him. Poirot rose from the bed, adjusted his coat, and took one final look at his reflection in the mirror. It was time to dig deeper. There were still people in the house who knew more than they were letting on, and he was determined to unearth their secrets. As Poirot made his way downstairs, the house felt quieter than usual. The lingering tension from the night before seemed to have settled in the walls, thick and oppressive. The staff moved about quietly, their heads down as they went about their duties. But Poirot could see the nervous glances they exchanged. The air felt heavy with unspoken fears. He made his way to the east wing, where Stefano had died. The room where he had fallen from the balcony was eerily still, the silence almost unbearable. A pale light filtered through the cracked shutters, casting faint stripes across the worn carpet. A chill hung in the air, and Poirot couldn't help but notice the subtle shift in the atmosphere. The room seemed colder than it should have been, as if the very walls were remembering Stefano's death. Marco Rossi, the Countess's brother, was already there, standing in the doorway, his face pale and drawn. His hands were clasped behind his back, his shoulders stiff with an unspoken tension. Poirot approached him slowly. Monsieur Rossi, I trust you are well this morning?" Poirot's voice was smooth, but there was a certain sharpness to it, something that hinted at the questions he had yet to ask. Marco turned slowly to face him, his eyes weary, as though he hadn't slept in days. His lips were pressed into a thin line, and he did not immediately answer. Instead, he motioned for Poirot to enter the room. "You wish to see the place where Stefano died, I presume?" he said, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. Poirot nodded. "Yes, it is important that I understand the circumstances surrounding his death. You see, I do not believe it was an accident." Marco's eyes flickered with something, anger perhaps, or guilt. "Of course it wasn't an accident," he replied bitterly. "But I do not think Stefano intended to die that night. I believe it was the curse. Something about this house drives people to madness." Poirot's gaze never wavered. "The curse, yes. But I am not here to investigate spirits, Monsieur Rossi. I am here to uncover the truth. And the truth is, Stefano's death was not simply the result of some supernatural force. There is something more to it, something that we are not yet seeing." Marco let out a sharp breath, as if he had been holding something in for too long. He stepped aside, allowing Poirot to enter the room fully. "I don't know what to tell you, Poirot. You may be right, but Stefano was a good man. He wouldn't have jumped." "Not like that," Poirot surveyed the room. The balcony was just beyond the window, its iron railing rusted and worn from years of neglect. The ground below was still damp from the previous night's rain, the faint traces of footprints still visible in the wet soil. He approached the balcony, his mind working quickly. The distance from the railing to the ground was not insurmountable, but it would have been a considerable fall for someone not intending to jump. He crouched near the window, his sharp eyes scanning the room for any signs that might indicate a struggle or an unnatural movement. The furniture was undisturbed. Nothing appeared to have been moved in a way that suggested a struggle. Poirot turned to Marco, who was standing by the door, his hands twitching nervously at his sides. "Tell me, Monsieur Rossi, when you found your cousin's body, was there anything unusual? Anything that did not fit with what you expected from an accident?" Marco hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. "No, nothing except the look on his face. It was like he had seen something, like he was terrified. His eyes were wide open, frozen in shock. But when I reached him, there was no sign of struggle, no blood, nothing." Poirot stood up, his thoughts swirling. "So, the body was found without any obvious injuries, yet you claim Stefano was frightened before he fell?" Marco nodded slowly. "Yes." "But what does it mean, Poirot? Why was he so scared?" Poirot looked at Marco carefully. "I believe Stefano knew something that terrified him, but it wasn't the fall that killed him, it was something else. He was murdered, not by the curse, but by the hands of someone who knew how to make it look like an accident." The words hung in the air, thick and heavy with implication. Marco's face went pale, and for a moment he seemed to lose his composure. He looked away, his fists clenched tightly by his sides. "You're saying you think someone in the family did this?" Marco's voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. Poirot nodded. "Yes. And I believe it was someone who wanted to silence Stefano before he could reveal what he had discovered." "Discovered?" Marco echoed, his voice trembling with confusion. "What do you mean?" Poirot didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned back toward the window, his gaze fixed on the faint trace of footprints on the ground below. "Stefano must have seen something he wasn't supposed to. Perhaps he uncovered something from the past, something related to your family's history. And someone silenced him." Marco's face twisted with anguish. "Stefano, he was obsessed with the old letters. The journals. He said he had found something that would change everything, but I didn't believe him. I thought he was just what?" Poirot pressed, his voice firm but not unkind. "I thought he was just imagining things. I didn't want to listen. But now I wonder if he was right. What if he found something, Poirot? What if he discovered the truth about Elena?" Poirot's eyes flashed with understanding. "What if he did?" he murmured. "And what if that truth was so dangerous, so damning, that someone felt the need to kill him before he could speak?" For a moment, the two men stood in silence, the weight of the words between them settling like a heavy fog. The air seemed to thicken, the tension becoming almost unbearable. Finally, Poirot turned to Marco, his voice low but resolute. "I will find the truth, Monsieur Rossi, and when I do, I believe the answer to Stefano's death will reveal itself. The curse, the ghost, all of it, it will be nothing more than a smokescreen. The real enemy is hiding in plain sight." Marco looked at him, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. "You think you can uncover it, Poirot? You think you can find the murderer?" Poirot smiled, his eyes glinting with quiet confidence. "I do not think, Monsieur Rossi. I know." Chapter 7. The Search for Clues. The morning after the unsettling conversation with Marco Rossi, Hercule Poirot stood in the center of the Palazzo's vast library, surrounded by shelves upon shelves of leather-bound volumes and dusty scrolls. The faint scent of old paper and ink filled the air, and the dim light filtering through the heavy curtains cast a golden glow on the wooden floors. For a moment, the scene was peaceful, almost serene. But beneath this calm exterior, Poirot's mind was whirring, already several steps ahead, seeking the missing piece of the puzzle. The Countess had been unusually quiet since Stefano's death had been confirmed as a murder, and Poirot could sense that she was hiding something important. She had told him about her family's troubled history, but there was more. There always was. The journals, the old letters, the records that Stefano had been obsessively studying before his untimely demise were key to understanding what was happening. Poirot's sharp gaze swept the room, taking in the details. There was something to be learned here, something he hadn't yet uncovered. The family's past, it seemed, was tangled up with this house. And this house had a story to tell. "Excuse me, Monsieur Poirot," came a voice from the doorway, breaking his train of thought. Poirot turned to find Giorgio, the family's attorney, standing in the threshold. His gaunt face was as rigid and unreadable as ever, though there was a slight nervousness in his posture. Poirot inclined his head, acknowledging the interruption. "Ah, Giorgio, what brings you to the library at this hour?" Giorgio's eyes darted around the room, as though he were checking for any unwanted listeners. "I've come to speak with you, Monsieur Poirot, about Stefano's death and other matters. There are things I must tell you, but they are not for the ears of everyone in this house." Poirot stepped aside, motioning for Giorgio to enter. "Please do tell. I am always open to hearing the truth, no matter how complicated it may be." The attorney hesitated, his eyes flicking toward the shelves, as though he were weighing the decision in his mind. Finally, he walked into the room and closed the door behind him. He lowered his voice, though the tension in his tone was still unmistakable. "Stefano." He had been digging into the family archives, searching for something he didn't fully understand. I tried to warn him, but he wouldn't listen. He was obsessed with finding the truth. The truth about Elena Bianchi and her curse. But it wasn't the curse that he should have been worried about. Poirot raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What do you mean, Giorgio? What truth did Stefano uncover?" The attorney swallowed hard. "It's not just the curse. It's the documents Stefano found in the vault. They reveal things about the Rossi family's past. Things that, if they were made public, could destroy us. My family, the Bianchis, and the Rossi have been intertwined for generations, far longer than most people know. There are secrets in these walls, secrets that Stefano was getting too close to." Poirot's sharp mind processed this information quickly. What kind of secrets? Was Stefano about to expose something? "I believe so," Giorgio said, his voice barely above a whisper. But Stefano wasn't the first to dig into these records. A long time ago, my own family, my father, had been a part of the Rossi household. And there was a scandal, a tragic affair, something that was buried to protect the Rossi name. But Elena Bianchi, she knew. She had always known. And now Stefano was on the verge of discovering it. Poirot's eyes narrowed as he processed this new information. "An affair, you say? And this is connected to Elena Bianchi?" Giorgio nodded slowly. "Yes. Elena's father, Antonio, was more than just a rival to Giulio Rossi. He was once involved with Giulio's wife, Isabella Rossi, the Countess's grandmother. The affair was never meant to see the light of day. It was one of the many secrets my family has been forced to keep. And when Antonio Bianchi died, everything shifted." Poirot's interest peaked. "So, this affair between Antonio and Isabella Rossi, was it something Stefano uncovered in the archives?" "Yes," Giorgio replied, and that is why he died. He was getting too close to the truth. Stefano had found letters, journals, and old photographs, proof that Antonio was not only a rival, but had once been an intimate part of the Rossi family. The affair was the catalyst for everything. It is why the Bianchis and the Rossis have been enemies for so long. The curse is just a cover for something far deeper. Poirot's mind was racing, his thoughts weaving together the disparate pieces of information he had collected. This affair, this secret, it lies at the heart of the family's troubles. And Stefano, he must have uncovered it. But who killed him to prevent the truth from coming out? Was it someone from the Rossi family or someone else? Giorgio didn't answer immediately. Instead, he lowered his voice further. There are more secrets, Poirot. Stefano wasn't just looking at old letters. He was also tracking down the locations of hidden rooms, places in this house that no one ever mentions. Rooms that may contain other things that were meant to be erased from history. Poirot's pulse quickened, but he kept his face neutral. Hidden rooms? You mean in this palazzo? Giorgio nodded, his face etched with worry. Yes. And I believe Stefano found one of them. He told me he was going to search the east wing near the library. That's where I believe he uncovered the final clue. He was closer to discovering everything than we realized. And if someone didn't stop him, he would have ruined everything. Poirot's thoughts were a flurry of activity. So, Stefano found something and someone killed him to keep it hidden. Giorgio lowered his voice, his eyes glinting with something akin to desperation. Yes. But you must understand, Poirot. This isn't just a family secret. It's a matter of legacy. The Rossi family has built its reputation on lies, and if the truth gets out, everything will come crumbling down. That's why I was trying to protect Stefano, but I couldn't stop him. None of us could. Poirot stood still for a moment, considering everything Giorgio had told him. The deeper he dug into the Rossi family's history, the more twisted and dangerous the secrets became. The affair between Isabella Rossi and Antonio Bianchi had caused a rift that had lasted generations. And now, it was at the heart of the mystery. But there was still one question Poirot couldn't shake. Who had killed Stefano to ensure the truth remained buried? You're telling me that Stefano found something crucial, Poirot said, his voice firm, and someone wanted to silence him before he could expose it. Giorgio looked down at the floor, his hands shaking. Yes, and if you're going to solve this mystery, Poirot, you need to find the hidden rooms in this house. They hold the final key. But be careful. There are people here who will do anything to keep the past hidden. Poirot's eyes gleamed with resolve. I will find those rooms, Giorgio. And when I do, the truth will finally come to light. Chapter 8. The Ghostly Encounter. The morning after his conversation with Giorgio had left Hercule Poirot more certain than ever that the truth behind Stefano's death was closer than ever to being uncovered. The Rossi family's tangled web of lies and secrets had grown more complicated, and yet the pieces were beginning to align in a way that suggested the worst was yet to come. The hidden rooms, the affair between Isabella Rossi and Antonio Bianchi, the curse. All of these elements were converging toward an inevitable confrontation, but what lay beyond that was still unclear. Poirot spent the early hours of the day scouring the palazzo, carefully examining every corner, every nook. His sharp eyes never missed the smallest detail, the slightest inconsistency, but he was still lacking something that could tie the past and the present together. And then, as dusk fell over the city, A new, unexpected development emerged, throwing everything into chaos once again. It had been a quiet evening, the house strangely subdued after the previous night's tensions. The guests, now fully aware of the gravity of the situation, had become reclusive, retreating into their rooms or remaining in the drawing room, where their whispered conversations felt like secrets on the edge of being revealed. Poirot had gone to bed early, but sleep had evaded him. The mystery consumed his thoughts like a relentless tide, each wave crashing over him with new insights, new theories. He had decided to revisit the East Wing where Stefano's body had been found to investigate once more. He had been drawn back to it as though something within that part of the house was calling him. The air in the East Wing always felt different, colder, denser, as though the very walls of the house were holding on to something. Something ancient, something hidden. As Poirot approached the hallway leading to the balcony where Stefano had fallen, he felt it. A slight shift in the atmosphere, a change in the air that could only be described as unnatural. His instincts, honed over years of solving the most complex mysteries, told him that something was about to happen. The lights in the hallway flickered as though the electrical wiring was struggling to keep up with the growing tension in the air. Poirot paused, his sharp eyes scanning the shadows, his mind whirring. The moment felt heavy, laden with dread. He couldn't explain it, but he felt a presence, a palpable feeling that something unseen was nearby, watching him. He stepped forward cautiously, his every movement precise, calculating. As he walked deeper into the hallway, the coldness intensified, wrapping around him like an invisible fog. The air smelled faintly of dampness, of decay, as though the house had been sealed off from the world for far too long. Suddenly, a low, almost inaudible sound broke the silence. A faint rustling like the whisper of fabric moving against the air. Poirot's gaze snapped to the source of the noise, and there, standing in the middle of the hallway, was a figure. It was a woman, draped in a tattered gown, her back turned to him. Her long dark hair fell loosely around her shoulders, and her frame seemed almost translucent in the dim light. She stood perfectly still, her face hidden in shadow, as though she were waiting for something, or someone. Poirot's heart skipped a beat, but his trained mind quickly squashed any instinctual fear. He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. He knew, as certain as he knew his own name, that this figure was not a mere ghost. It was a carefully constructed illusion, a piece of the elaborate puzzle he was piecing together. "Madame," Poirot called out, his voice calm but firm. "I am afraid you are mistaken if you believe that you can deceive me." The figure didn't move, didn't respond. Poirot took another step forward, his eyes never leaving her. The rustling noise grew louder, and then, without warning, the figure turned slowly to face him. What he saw took him by surprise. A face he had never seen before, yet one that was strangely familiar. Her eyes were dark, hollow, and empty, like the eyes of a person who had seen too much, too deeply. Her lips were parted as though she was about to speak, but no words came out. Poirot stood frozen for a moment, his mind racing. He knew this woman, he could see it in her face, in her posture. But who was she? The realization came crashing down on him like a tidal wave. This was no ghost. It was a woman from the Rossi family's past. It was Elena Bianchi, the woman whose curse had haunted the family for generations. But Elena was supposed to be dead. Her death, long buried, had been the catalyst for everything that had followed. The curse had been the family's excuse for the destruction it had caused, but now it seemed that Elena's spirit, her presence, was not so easily dismissed. Before Poirot could speak again, The figure began to dissolve, fading into the shadows like smoke dissipating into the night. He rushed forward, but there was nothing. No trace, no sign that she had ever been there. His mind was spinning. Was this the supernatural force at the heart of the mystery? Or was it part of a much larger, more complex game, one designed to keep him off track? His thoughts raced, but his first instinct was to return to the place where he had seen the figure, the library. He turned on his heel and made his way quickly back to the east wing, his footsteps urgent now. As he neared the library, the tension in the air grew thick again, the atmosphere heavy with anticipation. His mind could not settle, and yet he knew that whatever had just occurred was a clue, a message. But from whom? When he reached the library, he saw that the door was slightly ajar, just as it had been the night before. He pushed it open cautiously and stepped inside. The room, as always, felt heavy with history, the walls lined with centuries of books and manuscripts that had witnessed the rise and fall of families, of fortunes, of secrets. Poirot moved toward the large desk at the far side of the room, where Stefano had last been seen. The desk was covered with papers, some of them still half open, as if Stefano had been in the midst of studying them when his life was cut short. As Poirot sifted through the papers, he found a letter that had been carelessly discarded. It was old, the ink faded and smudged in places, but the words were still legible. The letter was from Elena Bianchi. It spoke of revenge, of a family that had wronged her, and of a curse that would never be lifted until the truth was known. The curse Elena had written was not just a tale to frighten the Rossi family. It was a punishment, a divine reckoning that would not end until the past had been revealed and justice had been served. Poirot's pulse quickened as he read the letter. The curse was not supernatural. It was a lie, a weapon. Elena had used it to manipulate those around her, to exact her revenge. And now, it seemed, someone was still using it, just as she had. The realization hit him like a jolt of electricity. Someone in this house was playing a dangerous game, hiding behind the ghostly figure of Elena to keep the family's secrets buried. But who? Before Poirot could gather his thoughts, a loud crash echoed from the far corner of the library. He turned sharply, his hand instinctively reaching for the small revolver he kept hidden in his coat. But there was nothing there, nothing except a scattering of books that had fallen from a shelf. Poirot stood still, his mind processing the sudden shift in events. Whatever had just occurred, whatever this encounter had been, it was just the beginning. The game was far from over. Chapter 9. The tensions rise. The days following Poirot's encounter with the ghostly figure of Elena Bianchi were filled with growing unease. Every creak in the floorboards, every flicker of candlelight felt like a warning. It was as though the house itself had become a living, breathing entity, its secrets crawling in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered, and Poirot was getting closer, much closer to the truth. But the closer he came, the more dangerous things became. As the evening shadows grew longer and the tension in the palazzo reached a boiling point, the house seemed to hold its breath. The guests, once polite and eager to engage in small talk, were now skittish, their faces pale and drawn. The family, particularly Marco Rossi, was on edge. They could sense that Poirot was about to crack the case wide open, and they had no idea just how far they were willing to go to protect their secrets. Poirot had spent most of the day gathering information, examining Stefano's journals, and rereading the letters that had been scattered across the house. Each page seemed to reinforce the idea that this mystery was not one of mere superstition. It was rooted in the very history of the Rossi family. The affair between Isabella Rossi and Antonio Bianchi, the hidden rooms, and now the curse, it all pointed to something far more sinister than anyone had anticipated. But as the evening settled over the palazzo, Poirot knew that it was only a matter of time before the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. He had already spoken to Marco, and while the man had been cooperative, his responses were laced with fear. Fear of something or someone. Poirot's instincts told him that Marco knew more than he was letting on. But the question remained, what exactly was Marco hiding? The door to Poirot's room creaked open, and he looked up to find the Countess standing in the doorway. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. She looked as though she hadn't slept in days, and her hands were trembling as she gripped the doorframe. "Poirot," she whispered urgently, her voice barely audible. "You must come quickly." "There's been another incident." Poirot's expression hardened. "Another incident? What is it?" The Countess stepped forward, her gaze flicking nervously over her shoulder as though she feared being overheard. "It's Marco. He's been acting strange. He's locked himself in his study, and I hear him muttering to himself. I think he's lost his mind." Poirot stood up immediately, his mind already racing. Marco Rossi was becoming increasingly erratic, and the tension in the house was beginning to fray at the edges. It seemed that something or someone was pushing the family to the brink of madness. "Take me to him," Poirot said calmly, his voice firm but compassionate. "I will speak with him. We must understand what's happening before it's too late." The Countess nodded, her face a mixture of relief and dread, and led Poirot down the long corridor toward Marco's study. The house felt even quieter now, the silence almost oppressive. The air seemed to hang heavy, as if the walls themselves were closing in. When they reached Marco's study, Poirot could hear the soft sound of someone pacing inside. He knocked gently on the door. "Monsieur Rossi," he called, his voice calm, yet authoritative. "It is Hercule Poirot. May I speak with you?" There was a long pause before the sound of shuffling came from behind the door. Finally, Marco's voice, strained and brittle, replied, "Go away, Poirot. I don't want to talk to anyone." Poirot's gaze met the Countess's. She looked terrified, and Poirot could sense that this was more than just an outburst of frustration. Something had snapped inside Marco. He had reached his breaking point, and Poirot knew that now was the moment to confront him. "Monsieur Rossi," Poirot said gently, "I understand that you are under great pressure. But if you do not open this door and allow me to help you, things will only grow worse." There was a long silence. And then, with a creak of the hinges, the door slowly opened. Marco stood there, his face haggard and his eyes wide, as though he had not slept in days. His hair was disheveled, and his clothes were wrinkled as though he had been tossing and turning for hours. He looked like a man who had been pushed beyond the edge of his own sanity. Poirot took a step forward, his voice soothing yet firm. "I understand that you are frightened, Monsieur Rossi. But fear is a poor guide when one is trying to find the truth. You must face it head on." Marco's eyes flicked nervously to the Countess, who was standing behind Poirot, her face pale with worry. "It's too late, Poirot," Marco whispered, his voice trembling. "I've seen it. I've heard it. It's real. The curse. Elena. It's all true." Poirot's mind raced. The curse. Elena's spirit. Could it be possible? Was Marco speaking in hysteria, or was he about to reveal something crucial? He moved closer, his gaze never leaving Marco's face. "Tell me, Monsieur Rossi," Poirot said softly. "What have you seen? What is it that haunts you?" Marco's hands were shaking as he reached for a piece of paper on the desk. I've seen her. I've seen Elena. She's here, in the house, watching us. She's come to finish what she started. Poirot took the paper from Marco's trembling hands. It was a letter, hastily written, the ink smeared in places. It was addressed to Marco, but the handwriting was not his. It was a woman's handwriting, elegant and firm. The letter read, Marco, you have been warned. Do not think you can escape the consequences of your actions. The past is not something you can bury, no matter how deep you try to hide it. Elena has returned, and she will not stop until justice is done. The truth must be revealed, and when it is, you will pay for the sins of your ancestors. The letter ended abruptly, as though whoever had written it had been interrupted mid-thought. Poirot's heart raced as he read the letter. This was it, the final piece. The letter confirmed what he had suspected. Someone in the family had been using Elena's curse to manipulate the others, to keep the family's dark past hidden. But the question remained. Who had written it? And why had Marco been the recipient? He turned to Marco, whose eyes were now filled with terror. Do you recognize the handwriting, Monsieur Rossi? Marco's face twisted in confusion and fear. No, I don't. I don't know who wrote it, but it doesn't matter, does it? Elena is back. She's come to get us. Poirot shook his head, his mind working quickly. No, Monsieur Rossi. Elena is not back, but someone is using her memory, her legacy, to manipulate you. Someone in this house, someone who does not want the truth to come out. And I intend to find out who the Countess's face was pale, and she stepped closer to Marco. Poirot, what should we do? What if it is Elena's spirit? What if it's real? Poirot placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Do not fear, Countess. What haunts this house is not a spirit, but a conspiracy. A carefully constructed lie that is being used to destroy this family. And I will expose it. The tension in the room was palpable, but Poirot's calm demeanor gave them both a moment of clarity. He had made a breakthrough, and now he would uncover the final pieces of this twisted puzzle. Chapter 10. The motive unfolds. The clock ticked relentlessly, its ticking echoing through the halls of the palazzo. The air seemed thicker than usual, laden with the weight of unsaid words, buried truths, and the mounting tension that Poirot could feel creeping up around him. The Rossi family, once a symbol of wealth and respect, was now teetering on the edge of collapse, and Hercule Poirot was the only one who could unravel the web of deceit that had been spun around them for so long. After Marco's breakdown and the cryptic letter, Poirot knew the time had come to confront the truth. No more half measures, no more avoiding the inevitable. He needed to act quickly before the family was consumed by the madness that had begun to take root within it. Poirot had been quiet since the incident in Marco's study, allowing the family a moment to collect themselves. The Countess, though visibly shaken, had agreed to assist him in his investigation, but her eyes still held the haunting fear that had plagued her ever since Stefano's death. The curse, the ghost of Elena Bianchi, the letters, all these elements had pushed the family to the brink, and now, the key to solving the mystery lay in the one thing Poirot had yet to fully uncover, the hidden rooms. The next morning, Poirot gathered the family once again in the grand drawing room. There was no time for pleasantries. There was no time for distractions. The time for the truth had come. Ladies and gentlemen, Poirot began, his voice as calm and precise as ever. I have spent days listening to your fears, your secrets, and your lies. But now, we must face the truth together. The curse that haunts this house is not a ghost, nor is it a supernatural force. It is the creation of a mind that has sought to manipulate you all. The room fell silent as Poirot's words hung in the air. The family's collective breath seemed to pause, and even the servants who had been moving about the house seemed to stop in their tracks. "What do you mean?" Marco asked, his voice hoarse, his face pale from the strain of his recent breakdown. "You said it yourself. Elena's spirit is here. I saw it. I heard it." Poirot turned toward Marco, his expression soft but unwavering. "No, Monsieur Rossi, what you saw was not a spirit. It was a trick, a manipulation. Someone in this house, someone very close to you, has been using Elena Bianchi's legacy, her ghost, to control you, to keep you in fear." The Countess, who had been sitting quietly on the edge of a chaise lounge, spoke up. "But who would do such a thing, Poirot? Who in this house would want to manipulate us in this way? We have suffered enough." Poirot nodded, acknowledging the Countess's distress. "I know that, Countess. But the answer lies in the past. The affair between your grandmother, Isabella Rossi, and Antonio Bianchi, that affair was the catalyst. It has poisoned your family for generations, and now someone is using it to further their own agenda." A shiver passed through the room, and several members of the family shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The weight of Poirot's words hung heavily in the air, the truth they had been avoiding now coming to the forefront. "Stefano discovered something," Poirot continued, his gaze sweeping over the family members. "He was obsessed with uncovering the secrets that have haunted this house for years. He found the hidden rooms, the ones that have been locked away for generations, and in those rooms he found the truth." "Stefano," Marco whispered, his voice faltering. "What truth? What did he find?" Poirot turned his attention to Marco, his eyes piercing. "Your cousin found the journals, the letters, the photographs that connected your family to the Bianchis. He found the hidden rooms where the Rossi family's darkest secrets were stored, things that were meant to be erased from history. The affair, the betrayal, and the deep guilt that your family has carried for decades. Stefano had started to put the pieces together, and someone killed him to keep him quiet," Poirot said, his voice hardening. "Someone who had everything to lose if Stefano had revealed the truth." The room was eerily quiet now, the truth unfolding like a slow-moving storm. The family's eyes darted nervously from one person to another. They all knew who the culprit was, but no one wanted to speak the words aloud. Poirot turned to the Countess. "Countess, you know the history, your family's history. You were the one who inherited everything after your father's passing. You've always been the one to protect the Rossi name, but you cannot protect it any longer. The secrets must be revealed." The Countess's hands clenched in her lap, and her lips trembled. "What do you want me to say, Poirot?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "What do you want me to admit?" Poirot took a step closer to her, his eyes filled with a mixture of understanding and resolve. "I want you to admit that you've been hiding something. You've been hiding it for years. From your family, from everyone, and now that secret has cost your family more than you realize." She looked away, unable to meet his gaze. For a moment she said nothing, the weight of her own guilt pressing down on her. Then, slowly she spoke. "You're right," she said, her voice quiet but resolute. "I've been hiding it. I thought that by keeping the past buried, I could protect everyone, but now I see that it's only made things worse." Poirot nodded, understanding. "The affair between Isabella Rossi and Antonio Bianchi, It was not just a scandal. It was the beginning of the curse, the beginning of the family's downfall. The truth of the relationship and the child that came from it has been kept hidden. But Stefano was about to uncover it all. The Countess's face went white, and she looked toward Marco. "Marco," she whispered, "you knew, didn't you? You knew about the child. You knew what we had done." Marco, who had been silent until now, nodded slowly, his face filled with regret. "I knew," he said quietly. "I didn't want to believe it, but I knew. I knew that Stefano was getting too close to the truth, and I didn't want him to destroy everything we've worked for. Everything our family has built." Poirot's eyes were sharp. "And that is why you killed him. You didn't want the past to come to light. You wanted to protect the family's reputation no matter the cost." Marco's face twisted with shame and fear. "Yes," he said, his voice trembling. "I couldn't let him ruin everything. He was going to tell the world about the affair, about the child. I had to stop him." Poirot shook his head. "And so you killed him. You staged it as an accident, hoping no one would ever suspect the truth." The tension in the room was unbearable. Marco stood there, broken, the weight of his actions finally catching up with him. The family's legacy, built on lies and manipulation, was crumbling before their eyes. The Countess looked at Poirot, her face a mixture of grief and realization. "I wanted to protect my family. I didn't want anyone to know what we had done, but now I see that we can never move forward unless the truth is revealed." Poirot nodded. "Exactly. The truth must come out, no matter the cost. Only then will the curse, if you wish to call it that, be lifted. Only then will you be free of the lies that have shackled you." As Poirot turned toward the door, he looked back at the broken family behind him. They were no longer a unified front, no longer a force to be reckoned with. The secrets of the Rossi family had been exposed, and with that exposure came the bitter reality of their consequences. The game was over, and Poirot had won. Chapter 11. The Final Revelation. The evening in the palazzo had taken on an almost surreal quality. The weight of the truth was palpable in the air, suffocating the family, and yet it was the only thing that could set them free. Poirot stood at the center of the room, surrounded by the remnants of a once glorious family, now unraveling at the seams. His sharp eyes swept over the Rossi family, broken, filled with regret, and full of fear. They had tried so hard to protect themselves, to bury the past. But as Poirot had often said, the truth had a way of surfacing, no matter how deep the lie was buried. And now they could no longer escape the consequences. The Countess, pale and drawn, had not spoken much since the revelation. Marco stood by her side, his face etched with a mixture of shame and sorrow. Elena, the distant relative who had remained mostly silent throughout the investigation, had begun to tremble as the weight of the family's history came crashing down around them. Even Giorgio, the family's lawyer who had tried so desperately to maintain the facade of civility, now appeared lost, his usual composure shattered. Poirot had spent the last few hours explaining everything. The affair, the murder, the hidden rooms, and the curse that was nothing more than a carefully crafted illusion. But now, the most important piece of the puzzle remained. The identity of the true mastermind behind Stefano's death, the one who had orchestrated the entire series of events to keep the past buried. "Countess," Poirot said, his voice calm yet firm. He had been circling the family, watching their reactions, his mind piecing together the final strands of the mystery. "You are now faced with the truth. You know the sins of the past, and you know the consequences of Stefano's death. But there is one thing that remains unclear. Who among you, in your desperation to protect the family, decided to go so far as to silence Stefano? The room fell silent. No one moved. No one spoke. But Poirot could feel the tension rising, the weight of suspicion now falling heavily on each of them. They all had motives. They all had something to hide. But who had crossed the line into murder? The Countess slowly turned to face her brother, Marco. Her eyes, once filled with the weight of years of secrets, were now full of something else, something darker. "Marco," she said quietly, her voice wavering, "tell him. Tell Poirot what you did." Marco's face twisted with anguish, his eyes filled with guilt. He had been caught in the web of lies his family had spun, and now there was nowhere to hide. I didn't mean to kill him," he whispered, as if the admission itself pained him. But when Stefano found those letters, when he uncovered the affair between Isabella and Antonio, he was going to expose everything. He was going to ruin us all. I couldn't let that happen. He paused, his face drawn in despair. I tried to stop him. I warned him. But he wouldn't listen. He kept digging, asking questions. So, Marco's voice broke, and he swallowed hard, trying to maintain his composure. I made it look like an accident. I didn't know what else to do. I thought that if I could just silence him, everything would go back to normal. But I was wrong. I was so wrong. Poirot's sharp eyes never left Marco's face. He had suspected Marco all along, but now the truth was out in the open. The guilt, the fear, the lies. It had all led to this moment. The Rossi family had been broken by its own secrets, and Marco was the final piece of the puzzle. "And did you kill Stefano alone, Marco?" Poirot asked, his voice quiet but insistent. "Or was someone else involved? Someone who might have helped you conceal the truth?" Marco's eyes widened in panic. "No, I did it myself. I didn't want anyone else involved. I didn't want anyone to know." His voice grew frantic. But Elena knew. She always knew. She wanted him dead too." Poirot turned his gaze to Elena, who had been standing near the back of the room, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She had remained quiet until now, but Poirot could see the flicker of recognition in her eyes. "Is that true, Elena?" Poirot asked, his voice steady. "Were you involved in Stefano's death?" Elena took a slow, measured step forward, her face pale but resolute. "Yes," she said softly. "I knew what Stefano had uncovered. I knew he had found the hidden rooms, the letters, and I knew that if the truth came out, it would destroy everything. The Rossi family had already ruined my family. My father had been betrayed by them. I wanted revenge. I wanted them to suffer as we had suffered." Her voice wavered, but there was an unmistakable determination in her eyes. "I didn't want him dead. At least not at first. But when I saw the way he was changing, when I saw how he was determined to expose everything, I realized that if I didn't act, if I didn't help Marco, everything we had worked for, everything my family had worked for, would be gone." Poirot's expression softened, but only for a moment. "So, you helped Marco. You encouraged him to kill Stefano? To make it look like an accident?" "Yes," Elena admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "But I never expected it to go this far. I never expected the family to fall apart like this." Poirot paused, his gaze moving over each family member in turn. The truth had been laid bare, and now it was clear. Marco and Elena had been the masterminds behind Stefano's death. But they had not acted alone. They had been motivated by fear, fear of the family's past coming to light, fear of losing everything they had worked so hard to protect. "It is done," Poirot said softly. "The truth has been revealed. But it is not just Stefano who has paid the price for your actions. It is this entire family. The lies, the deceit, the betrayal. It has cost you everything. And now you must face the consequences." The room was deathly silent as Poirot's words sank in. The family, once united in wealth and privilege, now stood fractured, broken by the very secrets they had tried to keep hidden. Marco and Elena, their faces pale and filled with regret, understood that there was no turning back. The damage had been done. Poirot turned to the Countess, who had remained quiet throughout the confrontation. "Countess, your family's legacy has been tarnished by the sins of your ancestors and by your own actions. The truth has come out, and it will be up to you to rebuild, not just the family's name, but the trust that has been shattered." She nodded slowly, tears welling in her eyes. "I understand, Poirot. I will do whatever it takes to make things right." Poirot's gaze softened. "The road ahead will be difficult, Countess, but it is the only way forward." As Poirot turned to leave the room, he glanced back one last time. The Rossi family stood there, broken but not yet defeated. The truth had come at a high cost, but it had also set them free. Now it was up to them to rebuild from the ashes of their past. Chapter 12. The Aftermath. The palazzo was quiet, eerily quiet, as the family sat in the grand drawing room, a room once filled with lively conversation, laughter, and celebrations. Now the silence was suffocating. The air felt thick with guilt, regret, and the weight of the truth that had been uncovered. The Rossi family, once a beacon of Venetian nobility, was now broken. Their legacy had crumbled under the weight of their own secrets. Hercule Poirot stood by the grand window, gazing out at the fading light over Venice. The canals shimmered in the distance, the evening's golden hues casting long shadows over the city. It was a beautiful scene, one that would have been perfect for a leisurely stroll. But there would be no walks in Venice for the Rossi family, not anymore, not after what had been done. Turning away from the window, Poirot faced the Countess, who had remained silent throughout the proceedings. Her face was pale. Her once stately posture now drooped with the weight of the revelations. Marco sat beside her, his hands clasped tightly together, his head lowered as if the full magnitude of his actions was finally sinking in. Elena too sat across from them, her face drawn with the same mixture of regret and sorrow that now defined the entire family. I never thought it would come to this," the Countess said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought that by keeping the past buried we could protect everyone. But I see now that the truth, it always finds its way out." Poirot nodded, his expression soft but resolute. "The truth has a way of emerging, Countess. Even when one tries to keep it hidden, even when one goes to great lengths to bury it, the truth always finds its way. It cannot be locked away forever." Marco shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his face drawn with shame. Stefano. He was right. He had the courage to face the truth, to uncover what we had all tried to ignore, but I couldn't let him do it. I couldn't let the past destroy us. "And so you killed him," Poirot said simply, his gaze unwavering. "You believed that by silencing him you could protect your family, but instead you condemned it." "You condemned yourselves." Marco nodded, his eyes welling with tears. "I was afraid. I was afraid of losing everything, of everything we had built, everything my father had worked for. I thought If I could just stop Stefano, if I could just keep the past hidden, we could go on living as we had before. But I was wrong. I was so wrong. The Countess reached out, placing a trembling hand on Marco's. We were all wrong, Marco. We all failed, but now we must face the consequences. Poirot's voice was firm, but there is no judgment in it. You are not alone in your guilt. Everyone in this house has played a part in keeping the truth hidden. Each one of you is complicit in the lies that have destroyed this family. But now you have a chance to rebuild. It will not be easy and it will take time, but it is the only way forward. Elena spoke, her voice surprisingly steady for someone who had been so torn by her involvement in Stefano's death. But can we really rebuild? After everything that has happened, can we ever go back to who we were? Poirot looked at her, his eyes filled with quiet compassion. No, you cannot go back. You cannot erase what has been done, but you can start anew. It will take time, yes, and much effort, but the truth is the first step toward healing. It is the only way for you to move forward. The Countess nodded slowly, her face a mixture of sorrow and resolve. I never wanted any of this. I never wanted to hurt anyone, but now I see that hiding the truth only causes more pain. We cannot go on like this. Marco looked up at Poirot, his eyes filled with desperation. But what happens to us now? What will happen to the Rossi name? To our legacy? Poirot sighed, his gaze softening. Your name, your legacy, it is not something that can be taken away by one mistake, or even by a series of mistakes. What matters now is how you move forward, how you make amends for the damage that has been done. It will be a long road, but it is one you must walk. The Rossi name can be rebuilt, but only if you are willing to face the consequences of your actions and take responsibility for the wrongs you have committed. There was a long pause as the family absorbed Poirot's words. The weight of the truth was heavy, and yet there was a certain clarity that had come with it. The family had been living in the shadows for so long, hiding from the past. But now, they were standing in the light. It was painful, yes, but it was also freeing. Poirot turned and walked toward the grand fireplace, where a fire crackled gently. The warmth from the flames seemed to bring a sense of calm to the room, and for the first time in what felt like ages, the air didn't feel so thick, so suffocating. Countess, Poirot said, his voice softening. It is not my place to say what you should do with your family's legacy. But you must understand that the truth, while painful, is the foundation for a new beginning. It is the only way you will ever be free of the curse that has haunted you. The Countess nodded slowly, her expression weary but determined. I understand, Poirot. I will do what I must. For my family. For the future, Poirot turned to face the rest of the family. It is up to you now. You have the truth. You must choose what to do with it. Will you let it destroy you, or will you use it to rebuild? The family members looked at one another, their faces drawn but filled with a new sense of purpose. They were no longer running from the past, no longer hiding from the truth. They were finally ready to face what they had done and begin the painful process of healing. Poirot gave them one last look before he turned to leave. He had done his part. The mystery had been solved, the truth revealed, and now it was time for the Rossi family to face the consequences of their actions. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he also knew that the journey ahead, though difficult, was the only path toward redemption. As he walked out of the room, his mind turned to the case as a whole. Another family saved, or rather given the chance to save themselves. another mystery unraveled. But Poirot was no longer focused on the puzzle. He had already solved it. For the first time in what felt like days, Poirot allowed himself a small smile. There was satisfaction in knowing that, once again, justice had been served. And though the Rossi family's road ahead would be long and difficult, they had taken the first step. The rest, as Poirot knew all too well, was up to them.